Ever since people have developed plots of land that they can call home, they've turned their attention to the surrounding landscape and changed it to look more attractive. It's now commonplace to see neatly planted rows of flowers and perfectly manicured gardens, and in this video, we'll be taking a look at the top 15 incredible hedges in landscaping. Number 15. The Meikleour Beech Hedge, Scotland. As anyone who has had to take care of a hedge will know, they take a lot of effort to make sure they look just right. So you can only imagine what's involved in taking care of the tallest and longest hedge on Earth. It's called the Meikleour Beech Hedge, and it's near the village of Meikleour in Scotland, and measures in an incredible 1,740 feet long and 98 feet high. The hedge was planted in 1745 by 2 workers on the estate and immediately took to the fertile soil that surrounded it. Beyond its size, it's the color that attracts people from far and wide to see it, because it changes from a lush green in spring when the new shoots are growing to a deep bronze and golden color in the fall. Despite looking quite trim, the hedge isn't cut as often as you might think. A team of 4 to 6 workers spend several weeks clipping it every 10 years or so, which requires them to be lifted up on hydraulic lifters and only using hand tools to keep to tradition. The last time the hedge was trimmed was in 2019, and on that occasion it was the first time work had been done on it for 20 years. Number 14. Green Animals Topiary Garden, Rhode Island, U.S.A. The Green Animals Topiary Garden is in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and is the oldest topiary garden in the U.S. It was turned into what the owners referred to as a garden of living sculpture in the early 20th century, when the then gardener began experimenting with new shrubs and planting techniques. In the following decades, the garden went from strength to strength, with as many as 30 traditionally formed topiaries being grown. Rather than using wire frames beneath, they're grown naturally and trimmed by hand to give them the shape, and they become so spectacular that the gardens became a destination in their own right. The 7 acres are covered in perfectly maintained hedgerows, flower beds, and lawns, but the central focus remains the topiaries that are still meticulously maintained to this day. They are made from boxwood, California privet, and English yew, with each species lending itself to different types of design, whether they be animals, geometric shapes, or whatever else the gardeners are trying to create. There are now more than 80 sculpted trees on the site, which include representations of teddy bears, a camel, a giraffe, and 2 bears. Number 13. The Municipal Cemetery, Tulcan, Ecuador. Just 5 miles from the border with Colombia, the Municipal Cemetery in Tulcan, Ecuador is one of the most perfectly designed landscapes on the continent. The traditions of the sculpted hedges began in the 1930s when the cemetery's gardener, Jose Maria Azael Franco, decided to do something decorative with the cypress bushes that grew there. He kept working for years to create what he said was something, quote, so beautiful it invites one to die, end quote. And there are now more than 100 sculptures across the cemetery's 3 acres. Rather than opting for a religious theme, they're designed to celebrate the native species of Ecuador, so include a variety of animals and plants, as well as borrowing motifs from ancient cultures that once lived in the region. You'll see bushes that remind you of Roman, Incan, Aztec, and Egyptian designs, and there's a series of tree-colored walkways that lead you to different zones of the cemetery, where the sculptures all fit in with the same theme. It's amazing that one man was able to create such a thing, and since he passed away in 1985, it's been declared a site of national interest, and a whole team of gardeners has been employed to look after it. There are very few cemeteries in the world that are covered in topiary sculpture, but Franco saw the beauty in that. The bushes can live for as long as 500 years, so will outlast us all, and be a living connection with the past for those that visit it in the future to mourn the loss of their loved ones. Number 12. Lotusland, California. Ganawalska Lotusland is a 37-acre botanical garden in Montecito in California. It once formed part of the estate owned by Madame Ganawalska, and because of what's on display, it's only accessible to members of the public by making an advance reservation. Walska spent 4 decades from 1941 to develop the gardens, and was integral in all of the design decisions that were made. The grounds are split into 14 distinct gardens, which follow particular themes, and are some of the most perfectly landscaped plots of land in the country. There is, for example, a water garden that has a large lake, and plants such as lotuses and lilies, while the tropical gardens are full of cacti, ginger, and bananas, and the butterfly gardens have been planted with flowers that attract butterflies and other insects. There's truly something for everyone who's interested in horticulture here, and everything remains just how Walska originally envisioned it. The Topiary Garden is particularly special because it was the first in the world to feature a large topiary clock, which is 25 feet in diameter and also has a number of perfectly trained shrubs. This part of the site unfortunately became overgrown after Walska's death, but in the early 2000s a donation was given to the gardens that has now allowed the topiaries to be restored to their former glory. Number 11. Levens Hall, Cumbria, England. Levens Hall is a historical manor housed in northern England, and while it's popular with visitors who want to see the stately home and the collection of steam engines that's kept there, the real attraction are the grounds around it. Between 1689 and 1712, French gardener Guillaume Beaumont began planning the designs for the garden, including where to plant all of the trees, and the shape of the site today remains largely how he created it. The topiary garden of Levens Hall is the oldest one in the world. Most of the original box and yew trees are still growing there today. They're sculpted into various designs, such as abstract and geometric shapes, and are complemented by the planting of more than 30,000 bedding plants that are all grown in the greenhouse nearby. There are giant beech hedges, fountains, wildflower gardens, and even a willow labyrinth, and you can tell an extraordinary amount of work has to be put in to keep it looking like this. Towards the end of the summer, the gardeners begin the arduous task of clipping the topiary, a job that takes 4 of them more than 6 months to complete each year. Number 10. Château du Villandry, France. Château du Villandry in the commune of Villandry in central France sits on the former site of an ancient fortress. The grand manor house was built in the 14th century, but it was in the early 20th century that it became the incredible place that it is today. A significant amount of time and money was put in by a new owner to upgrade the house and to create a series of stunning gardens around it, and it's now regarded as one of the best landscaped pieces of land in the world. Covering an area of almost 15 acres, there are 6 distinct regions that include the water garden, which is full of ponds and fountains, the ornamental garden, which is a perfect example of what's possible with topiary, and a huge vegetable garden. Tremendous thought has been put into the placement of every single plant on the site, and this has resulted in perfectly shaped hedges, blocks of color, and a picturesque vista in every direction. The sun garden, for example, focuses on yellow flowers and is arranged around a star-shaped pond. Thanks to the gardens, the Château is one of the most visited ones in the whole of France, and it's now been classified as a World Heritage Site, and one that hopefully will be preserved for generations to come. Number 9. Church of San Rafael, Zarcero, Costa Rica. The climate of Costa Rica means that shrubs and flowers are able to grow there unlike many other places around the world, and it's not a surprise that the country is home to one of the most beautiful topiary gardens in the world. It's located behind the Church of San Rafael in the town of Zarcero and was created by Blanco Bernes in 1964. He's continued to work on it ever since, and there are now more than 100 topiary sculptures, as well as a wide variety of plant species that are native to the region. Sculptures on display include a dinosaur, an octopus, and Jesus Christ carrying a cross, but there are also 16 double-arched bushes that cover the pathway towards the church, and plenty of other secrets to find throughout. There's so much in the garden that it takes a full month just to clip everything, and when that's finally done, it's time to start at the beginning again. The creations have produced a peaceful and serene space that people visit to relax and escape the outside world. And after realizing this, Franco placed a series of inspirational phrases on hand-painted signs with words of wisdom such as, "Persevere and you shall succeed," and "Dedicate yourself to love and peace." We're constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Ladew Topiary Gardens, Maryland, U.S.A. First established in the 1930s, the Ladew Topiary Gardens can be found in the community of Moncton in Maryland. Throughout the grounds, which are on a 22-acre site, there are 15 separate garden rooms, each of which has a specific color or theme around 2 axes that meet at the center at an oval-shaped pool. It used to be a private property but was opened to the public in 1971 and has become a popular destination for enthusiasts. The man behind the gardens, Harvey S. Ladew, spent a lot of time traveling, and it was his experience of seeing the gardens when he was in England, along with his love of fox hunting, that inspired what these gardens have become most famous for, the topiaries. Amongst the various shapes and pristinely trimmed hedges, there are ones cut into the shapes of horses, riders, dogs, and a fox, as well as a Chinese junk complete with sails and various other animals like swans and giraffes. It has often won awards for being the most glorious topiary garden in the United States, and today is now run as a not-for-profit organization and welcomes visitors throughout the year with no admission charge, instead relying on donations to fund the extensive upkeep that's required. Number 7. Meikleour, Vézac, France. The Château de Meikleour in Vézac, France was built in the 17th century, with stunning views across the Dordogne Valley, but it was in the 1860s that the lavish gardens first began to take shape. A new owner began planting thousands upon thousands of box trees and started carving them into various shapes, his favorite being to make them look like a large flock of sheep. He added various other trees too, such as lindens, cypresses, and stone pines, and kept everything in theme with the design of the chateau at the center of it all. After he left, the gardens fell into a state of disrepair, but a new owner who took over the site in 1996 embarked on a mission to restore the gardens to how they once were. There are now more than 150,000 box trees on the site alone, which have all been meticulously shaped to create an almost unbelievably flowing landscape, and the addition of water features and a stream through the gardens have only made it even more impressive. The year after it was opened to the public, the gardens were classified as one of the notable gardens of France by the French Ministry of Culture, and they remain one of the most visited in the whole country. Number 6. Longwood Gardens, Pennsylvania, USA. Located in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, Longwood Gardens is a huge botanical garden that covers an area of approximately 1,077 acres. Open to visitors throughout the seasons and usually welcoming more than 1.5 million guests per year, it's regarded as one of the leading display gardens in the whole of the U.S. The gardens were first opened to the public in 1921, but have changed significantly since then. Today there's a wide range of different outdoor gardens as well as 20 indoor ones. The two most beautiful views are the geometrically designed Italian garden and the main fountains garden, but you can walk in virtually any direction and be treated to a new spectacle around every turn. The main focus of these gardens is to create an unparalleled display, and they've certainly achieved that. But they also preserve and collect species from around the world. The collection currently holds samples from at least 10,000 different taxa, and the conservatory itself grows more than 4,600 plants and trees at any time. It's simply impossible to see all that Longwood has to offer in one day, and people often dedicate an entire week to give themselves enough time to look around the entire site. With a theater, classes, and lectures on site too, there's far more to do than looking around the gardens, and it's no surprise that this place is so popular. Number 5. Topiary Park, Columbus, Ohio. The Old Deaf School Park, which is more commonly known as Topiary Park, is in a public garden in Columbus, Ohio. It was the former home of the city's school for deaf children, but that moved to a new location in 1953, and by the early 80s most of the buildings had burned down. The land had become somewhat of an eyesore, so the decision was made to rejuvenate it for the benefit of the local community. Two artists from Columbus came up with the idea of landscaping the park with inspiration from an 1884 painting by George Seurat called A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, and they got to work. The topiary was sculpted in 1989, and it served as an art installation as part of the Flora exhibition in the city in 1992, but it was so popular that it remained ever since. Small hills and a pond were put in to represent Paris's River Seine, and there are a series of different topiaries, including 54 that have been shaped like people, 8 that have been turned into boats, 3 dogs, a monkey, and a cat. As well as the main attractions, there are also a further 220 display trees from 35 different species and countless flowers. As well as being a destination simply to see the artistry and take a moment for relaxation, the park has become a central part of life and regularly holds events like jazz concerts. It's a beautiful place and a great example of how hedges and landscaping can completely change the vibe of a place. Number 4. Cliveden House, England. Cliveden House, which is in Buckinghamshire in the UK, is a stately home that was once the residence of several members of the royal family. Since the 1970s, though, it's been under the care of the National Trust and sees more than 500,000 visitors every year, most of whom go to see the extensive gardens. The house sits amongst 375 acres of land, 180 of which are perfectly maintained gardens, with the rest being woodlands. There's a huge amount to see, such as the largest parterre in Europe, which itself has 4 acres and a series of themed gardens. The Long Garden, which borrows from Italian designs, features topiaries in the shape of spirals and peacocks. while the Japanese-inspired water garden is believed to be the first like it in Europe. There's a temple, a large collection of sculptures throughout the grounds, hidden cottages, and some of the greatest attention to detail you'll see in any garden around the world. But the one thing that possibly stands out the most is the Cliveden Maze. It was commissioned by Lord Astor, the then owner, in 1894, and still keeps to the same design today. It's made up of 1,100 yew trees, each of which is maintained at a precise 6 feet tall, and together cover an area of 1/3 of an acre. Number 3. Drummond Castle Gardens, Scotland. Scotland is known for its castles, but if it's the surroundings you want to see, then the best one to visit is Drummond Castle in Perthshire. The gardens there are simply incredible, and it's described by the government as the best example of formal terraced gardens in Scotland. The layout of the terraces was first designed in the 1630s, but did suffer serious damage during the wars that broke out in the subsequent centuries. The current layout was the result of a restoration that took place in the 19th century, and have been kept perfectly maintained ever since. Built into a steep hillside, the gardens are terraced to make it easier to walk between them, and are split into several different sections and themes. There are still some of the ancient yew hedges that were planted hundreds of years ago, and even a beech tree that was planted by Queen Victoria when she visited the castle in 1842. There are hundreds of different plant species growing around the site, each of which has been purposefully matched with their surroundings to form a part of a wider design. The idea is that no matter which way you look out from the castle, there's a stunning view. And when you see images of the place, you realize that there's not a single shrub that looks out of place. It's not a style that appeals to everyone, but as far as formal gardens like these go, you'd be hard-pressed to find any that are better. Number 2. Manoir d'Erignac, France. Built in the 17th century, Manoir d'Erignac is a manor house in the Dordogne region of France. When it was constructed, it had a contemporary garden that was maintained until the 20th century. But in the 1960s, the new owners of the site decided they wanted to refresh it. They began landscaping the entire plot and replaced it all with a replica 18th century Italian Renaissance-style garden, complete with one of the most elaborate topiary gardens you'll find anywhere in the world. Split into 7 gardens, which include the White Garden, the Chinese Pagoda, the Spring Gardens, and the French Garden, there are countless fountains, statues, precisely planned vistas, and even a pathway that's lined with vases. The main species of trees are yews, box trees, hornbeams, and cypresses, but there are plenty of other plants too, all of which have been carefully positioned and sculpted to create the overall effect. The topiaries are what the gardens are most famous for, and there are more than 300 that have been carved into virtually every shape you can think of. The maintenance of so many of them is so much work that there are 4 full-time gardeners whose sole job it is to trim them and keep them neat. Number 1. Kairakuen, Mito, Japan. Located in the city of Mito in Japan, Kairakuen is one of the 3 great gardens of Japan. It was built in 1841 by a local lord called Tokugawa Nariaki, and right from the start the intent was to open it to the public for their enjoyment. The garden itself covers an area of 32 acres and is most famous for its variety of plum trees. There are more than 3,000 of them from over 100 different varieties, and when they blossom between February and March each year, they create a fairy tale-like vista. That's the time when the garden is busiest, with festivals celebrating the arrival of spring. But there's far more to see at Kairakuen during the rest of the year too. It's also full of cherry trees, azaleas, hagi flowers, and far more of Japan's natural species. And ever since it's opened, it has fulfilled its purpose of providing a sanctuary to everyone who enters. It was designed along the principles of yin and yang, with at first a path that descends into a forest of bamboo. As you move forward, you're surrounded by dark-colored Japanese cedars before reaching the Senakidai Observatory platform that provides wondrous views over Lake Semba and all of the plum trees. Further into it, you'll find a traditional tea house from the Edo period called Kobunte, and this is where the lord who built the garden lived. It was here that he hosted poets and artists, and as you'd expect, the views surrounding it are the best in the garden. Once a month, a tea ceremony is held to commemorate what the Lord did for the city. But during plum season, this is held outdoors and is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Watch our nature playlist for more top 15 videos about beautiful nature. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best nature videos.